So welcome everyone back to Jerry's Take on China. This is actually the first live stream I've done for about 3 months. It's been certainly over 2 months, and it's a great pleasure to have once again Robbie Barwick of the Australian Citizens Party. And we're going to talk today about Australia specifically because 2 or 3 things are happening. One is that the Prime Minister is in China today for a 6-day visit, which is quite important because that's probably longer than most prime ministers come to China. And he's going to be doing business, he's going to be doing diplomatic, and he's going to be doing some cultural exchanges too, which is great to see, finally. And I see that as a warming of relations. The other thing is that there are some conflicts between China and Australia which seem to be simmering. And we've got a couple of things going on in the legal system. Now, Robbie, you are a representative of the Australian Citizens Party, so I'm not going to ask you to say anything that's going to be sub judice, but we do want to talk about a couple of court cases that will be going on. One's not a court case. One is a decision by the minister to deport someone, and the other one is a court case which is coming up fairly soon. So let's, without further ado, welcome you, Robbie, and
thanks, Jerry.
Say good day.
G'day. And I think we should start with, if you don't mind, with the court cases, especially Dan Duggan, because that's actually quite an urgent issue right now. There's a looming hard deadline on the Dan Duggan case, and this is something that I think all Australians should be extremely concerned about, and international observers of Australia should also be concerned about and also be curious as to why something like this can happen in this country. The very latest is that Dan Duggan is facing court on the 26th of August, and that is his final last-ditch appeal, Jerry, against extradition. Now, to recap quickly, this is Dan Duggan's now been in prison for over 990 days without ever having broken any Australian law. He's in prison in Australia, in New South Wales. He's never broken any Australian law. In fact, he's never been charged with breaking a law in his life. Maybe he, exceeded the speed limit when he was a young man or something, but he has a perfectly clean record his whole life. Yet he's been in an Australian prison for coming up to 3 years now, without being in breach of any Australian law at all, because the United States wants to extradite him. And the United States has requested to extradite him because he was previously an American citizen who served as a Navy pilot, a Top Gun pilot, and a very, very good one. He excelled at that. One of Dan's character references is coming from his former commander in the US Navy, who is defending him to the hilt because he knows him so well. But when Dan, at the end of the 90s, received an honourable discharge from the US Navy, he had met an Australian girl, and so he followed his heart, and he moved to Australia, moved to Tasmania, married the Australian girl, started an Australian family, and in 2012, that was in the year 2002, 10 years later in 2012, with an Australian wife, an Australian family, and an Australian business, he decided to become an Australian citizen. And 26th of January 2012, which is our national day here, Australia Day, he was naturalised and became an Australian citizen. And he has a document from the United States confirming that he denaturalized himself on that day. In other words, he gave up his US citizenship on that day. Now, that's important. That's not a random fact. That's very important because the Americans are trying to ignore that fact in their pursuit of him, because their pursuit of him is only relevant if he is an Australian citizen, because they are pursuing him for something he did later on that year, after he gave up his US citizenship. Later on that year, 2012, he went to South Africa for a little period of time, a matter of a month or two, and he worked as a consultant for a a flight training academy, quite a well-known one in South Africa, training pilots, and some of those pilots included Chinese pilots. And this is quite important. So that was in 2012. 5 years later, the United States Justice Department convened a secret grand jury in Washington, impaneled a secret grand jury in Washington, and indicted him for what he had done 5 years earlier in South Africa. The indictment was 5 years later. But get this, Jerry. I have confirmed it with people who are at that test flight academy in South Africa that the US authorities knew at the time he was there what he was doing. Not only did they know it, the US Embassy sent officials, the US Embassy in South Africa sent officials to the test flight academy to observe it. So why did it take 5 years for an indictment to be issued against him when they knew at the time what he was doing? Because essentially what they're accusing him of is providing, there's an American law against trafficking in arms to other countries. You can only do it with very strict US permissions, right? So you need the permission of the US government to traffic in arms. So under that law, the Americans are charging Dan Duggan with trafficking in arms by providing training without permission. It's the first time training has been applied to this arms trafficking regulation. And it's essentially that he didn't have American permission to provide this training. And they're trying to say that this comes under their trafficking in arms regulations, right?
So what will happen to him if he is deported and he does face trial in the United States? What is he facing there? What's the consequences of this? Well,
the charges that all the things they've added on. So there's three essential charges that added up come to about 65 years. Now he's already 50. He's 50. He's 55.
So effectively, this is a life sentence for someone who hasn't actually broken any law.
But the three charges, can I say something about the three charges? So one charge is he breached this trafficking in arms regulation. The second charge is he conspired to breach the trafficking in arms regulation. And the third charge is money laundering, a charge of money laundering in relation to both those other two charges. Like I said, they knew at the time what he was doing. And it took him 5 years to indict him. The second one was conspiracy, is a conspiracy charge. Everybody else mentioned in the indictment, Jerry, that he conspired with are not US citizens. This charge can only relate to US citizens. No, the US cannot say to anybody else in the world that you cannot go and sell a gun or sell a plane or provide training. This is only Americans have to abide by this law. So this is how bizarre this indictment is. They're accusing him of conspiring to commit a crime with other people to whom the crime doesn't apply. And it doesn't apply to him because he wasn't a US citizen either, because he'd give up his citizenship, but they're trying to claim that that's still going to apply to him anyway. And then the third one is money laundering. And when you read books like Frederick Fiorucci's The American Trap, about how the US Justice Department achieves its like 99% conviction rate, a US Justice Department has a Soviet Gulag level conviction rate, because what it does, it never goes to court. It loads up its targets with charges, right? Threatens them with 50-year, 100-year, 150-year, 10,000-year sentences, and then says, if you plea bargain with us, you can have 18 months, right? And these poor crushed people almost always end up plea bargaining. And one of their favorite ones is money laundering. So chuck money laundering on it as well. And those are the three charges that Dan has to face. But back to the 5 year gap, because I think this is quite important. The 5 year gap proves something. What happened in those 5 years? Well, there was a very big difference in American attitudes towards China between 2012 and 2017. By 2017, the Trump administration was in office. People with extreme China haters like Mike Pompeo and Peter Navarro, these kind of characters, and they had suddenly taken this sharp turn against China and demanding all their allies go with them. And so it was the politics that changed. And to me, the 5-year gap proves that these charges against Dan Duggan are ultimately political. And the problem for Dan and the problem for all Australian citizens is that up to that point, the American actions are relevant. From that point, they're irrelevant because everything else done against him has been at the hands of his own government. Instead of protecting their citizen and 7 other Australian citizens, natural Australian citizens, born in Australia, his wife and 6 children, they have actively conspired with the United States to destroy them.
Yes,
I mean,
because his wife, Safi, has a home that she can't even capitalize, she can't leverage and borrow against, because the US government have actually put some sort of a lien on that as well, haven't they?
They have. They will not let them. She was a day away from selling her property. It would have been earned them as much as $4 million, or they could have borrowed against it, as you said. And the day before, the US government got a caveat put against it, and so that money would have done very well towards helping to fund their legal appeals. Yep. Their legal team is working on a deferred payment arrangement. They now have to have 2 legal teams because they have a US legal team as well, which does have to be paid. So the wife, Safrine, has been blocked. She's had to deal for nearly 3 years. She's had to raise 6 children without the main breadwinner in the house. These 6 children, they range in age from, I think the eldest is either 20 or close to 20, and so there's 3 older children and 3 younger children. The youngest is under 10. The younger ones, I've seen Dan Duggan's description of this. These children are suffering, at this age without their father. I mean, any child would suffer, as you can imagine, in those circumstances. These children are definitely suffering what they're going through. Dan is being discriminated against in the New South Wales prison system. So, for instance, I was going to go and visit Dan Duggan at one stage, along with journalists like Mary Kostakides, who we'll talk about in a minute. We were flat out banned from visiting him. He's not allowed to. He has not broken any law in Australia. He is not allowed to talk to the media, right? Very recently, the court actually discontinued the prison discontinued visits by anyone other than his immediate family. Then they put this other limitation on it that he can only have visits on Sundays. On Saturdays and not Sundays. Yeah. And of course, with young children, one of their best distractions is being involved in sports, which happen on Saturdays. And Dan does not want his children to give up their sport, but it means going long times without seeing his children. Can
I interject with a question here? Is that just for Dan, or is that a prison policy where visiting times or visiting dates have been changed from Sunday to Saturday?
The Saturday to Sunday thing is a prison policy. Right. The other 2 parts are just for Dan. Cutting him off from visiting anyone, from having visits from anyone who's not his immediate family, it was just for him, and not seeing the media is just for him. Now, and he's the only person in that prison who's not guilty, right? He's
probably not, but yeah. Well, he's one of them.
So the other people are all convicted rapists and murderers and thieves and whatever, right? They get to have all those privileges that have been denied to him. Now, the one they just recently reversed the one about his only being able to be visited by his immediate family. So someone must have seen the backlash and intervened, decided that wasn't good enough. But the question is, why is this happening in the first place? again to an innocent man. So these are some of the conditions that he's been subjected to.
Are you saying there that he's the only prisoner in that prison who is unconvicted? So he's on remand. Effectively, they have a system called remand. He's the only one in that prison.
He's the only one who's unconvicted. Yes.
My God.
Yeah. So this is also he can't get legal aid, and the reason he can't get legal aid is because legal aid applies to when you are charged with a crime in Australia.
He hasn't been charged with a crime in Australia.
He hasn't been charged in a crime in Australia. He is being extradited by the United States.
Yeah. So this is why I put up Free Dan Duggan on the screen here for everyone to see. If there are a couple of places where anyone, if they want to, can go and make a donation. I know that you have. I know I have. We've both done this, but I think any income that I make from this will go towards Dan Duggan's appeal. He does not have any form of public support, and he can't leverage against the home that he and his wife own because the American government have held that. Now, I seem to remember that there was a huge disparity between the money laundering case, which was just for his salary, his income for being in South Africa and doing the training that he did. His income for that period of time is the money they're talking that he was money laundering.
That's
and
right.
It's $100,000 US dollars or something like that. I'm not sure of the exact details, but in terms of reference to the value of his home, it's nothing. So they could actually put a caveat onto the money that they say he's laundered and let him sell the house or let them sell the house, but they won't. They have actually kept his multi-million-dollar, which is not a big house, big home in Sydney. You have to be. People start thinking multi-million-dollar home. No, everything in Sydney is multi-million-dollar. It's not, or everything in New South Wales. It's certainly, if you're within reach of Sydney, it costs that much money to live there. So it's not like he's a rich guy. They have just put a caveat onto his property, the only asset that he and his wife have, and said, you can't have that. We're going to keep it. And so anyone who can make a donation, please, Free Dan Duggan, just go online, find that, and it will link you to places. And there are many of them because they're on Twitter, they're on YouTube, they're on Facebook, they're on. There's a website called Free Dan Duggan.
The Free Dan Duggan website. The Free Dan Duggan website is the best resource. But you'll see other things like there's a My Cause. There's a platform called My Cause, and they have a page up there as well. Let me reiterate what you're saying, Jerry. The family needs to raise in the order of $300,000 by the 26th of August because this is their last ditch appeal. And their legal team is doing everything that they can do. But because of what we just discussed, they've been forced to fight with one hand tied behind their back. The almighty United States cannot stand to meet this Australian family on a level playing field. Now, so they're scratching for money. They're scratching for support from their fellow Australians, and we are the only ones that can help them. We are the only ones that will help them. But we all pay tax, and our taxes go to the federal government. And do you know who's paying the bill for the American side of this legal stoush with Dan Duggan?
Don't tell me it's the Australian federal government. Right.
The Australian taxpayers through the federal government. Our federal government picks up the Americans' costs. This is under the extradition treaty that we have with the United States. So our government is bending over backwards to assist the US in this extradition against an Australian citizen and his family. They are paying the bill for it under the extradition treaty. Our government is trying to retrospectively apply a 2018 law to fit Dan Duggan's accused offences in 2012. And what I mean by that is the basic requirement to be extradited is you have to meet the criteria of dual criminality. The accused crime has to be a crime in both countries. We do not have this American law that Dan's been indicted under in the United States. So what the Australian government has done is they've taken a 2018 law and said this applies. But hang on, the the accused offences are from 2012. You're trying to apply the law retrospectively so that you can twist it into meeting the criteria to justify you agreeing to this extradition. This is what our government is doing to help the United States of America. And it's there's another contrast here. A few weeks ago, Sky News down here did a documentary on Chang Lei, who was the Australian
broadcaster,
CGTN, I think, or one of those channels. And she's an Australian Chinese, but she worked in China, and she was detained for around 3 years from 2020 to 2023 before she was released. And they did a documentary on that. It turns out Dan Duggan actually knows Chang Lei and her partner when they were because they all lived in Beijing together, the expat Australian community in Beijing. So they know each other. He watched that documentary on Sky News in prison when it was on, and he described to someone I know who spoke to him that it gave him PTSD, right? Because when it was just based on the similarity of the prison experience. Now you're on the other side of the bars, Jerry, but you can probably relate to what they're talking about. You were the one giving people the prison experience. These were the people getting the experience.
Not that often.
So that's how Dan felt, and he truly felt for Chang Lei. But Chang Lei was a cause célèbre for the Australian government while she was in detention in China. Right, she was wall-to-wall news all of the time, and Australia turned heaven and earth to get her out.
And there's a slight difference here. There's a couple of things here. One is that neither of these people are born Australians, but both have chosen to be Australians. So there's a similarity.
Yep.
But the difference is that Chang Lei actually pleaded guilty to a criminal offence and served her time, and she was on remand. Not in isolation prisons, although she says she was, but as far as I understand, she was treated very well. She had full diplomatic protections and things like that. The Australian government, the Australian embassy were allowed to visit her and meet with her. They were present at all of her court cases. Everything was done above board and in a transparent manner, which doesn't appear to be happening in Australia right now. And she did have access to all things. Her family didn't visit her in China because they were afraid. And I don't know whether that fear is justified or not, but usually any fear of China is usually brought about by misinformation rather than the reality. I would much.
And also COVID was a factor there.
That's true. COVID was a factor. Well. Yeah, we couldn't travel around at the time. Yeah, so that was difficult. But yeah, Chang Lei actually pleaded guilty, and she was sentenced to. I think she was sentenced to exactly the sentence that she'd served on remand, and then released that same day as she was sentenced, or the day after she was sentenced.
Well, the reason
China did all the right things with her. Australia doesn't appear to be doing the right things, and both of these are Australian citizens. Australia seemed to fight tooth and nail for a Chinese Australian citizen, but they won't fight tooth and nail for an American-born Australian citizen.
Well, the other way of putting it is Australia will fight tooth and nail if China is the country that's holding you, but they will not fight tooth and nail if America is the country that's trying to get you. So if America is the country that's coming after you, your government will not protect you. This is the lesson of the Dan Duggan case, and that's why it's the Australian people that need to get behind this case. There's the legal fight on the 26th of August is going to be a bit of a mess because they're up against this terribly drafted extradition treaty that we have with the United States, which is all rigged in the United States' favor. And as I've said, the Australian government has already is trying to apply a law retrospectively, etc. But what we do have in the treaty, like with all treaties, is this: despite all the conditions in the treaty, at the end of the day, the Attorney General of Australia has the absolute power to flat out deny this extradition with no correspondence entered into. It is the Attorney General's prerogative to deny this or approve this. Now, currently it's been approved from the previous Attorney General, and that's what Dan's appealing. But they can change their mind any time, and they can deny this and say, no, this is an Australian citizen. You do not. If we have to try and find a 2018 law and apply it retrospectively to fit the criteria of this extradition, then this clearly is not a legitimate extradition. And so, no, are we the Australian government, going to again bend over backwards for the Trump administration, which is shafting us in so many ways right now, or are we going to stand up for an Australian citizen? And I think that's the pressure we need to bring to bear on them has to be targeted at the Attorney General and the Prime Minister. And so I'm appealing to everyone who's watching this to do it in two ways. One is, please donate as generously as you can to the family on the Free Dan Duggan website. Two, contact Michelle Rowland, the Attorney General. She's new in the job. Email her and just ask her straight out to Free Dan Duggan. We need public pressure for the Australian government to change its position on this and free this guy, because if the extradition goes ahead, this beautiful Australian family of a husband and wife and 6 children will be absolutely destroyed just because our government was too cowardly to stand up for Australian citizens against the unreasonable, irrational, insane, racist, warmongering demands of a regime in America that is out of control.
Don't beat about the bush, Robbie. Tell it like it is. Yeah. Okay, so moving on from Dan Duggan. That's a great appeal, an appeal from the heart and very emotional. I think that's something that needs to be remembered. This is a family that is going to be literally torn apart if the Australian government fulfills the wishes of a racist bunch of bigots who are just purely and simply trying to destroy this family because there's a connection with China. So let's try to prevent that from happening. We've got 100 viewers here. 100 of you, please send an email to the Attorney General in Australia. Just do that. Nothing else. You don't have to donate money if you can't afford it. Don't. But send an email. So please try and do that. Next thing. Let's move on to the relationship with China, because this kind of segues into what's happening now. Anthony Albanese, the Prime Minister of Australia, is in China today. I caught up with him for a coffee this morning. No, I didn't really. But, he's in China. I wish I'd have something to say to him. But I'm tending to see now, really, this for the first time since he was elected, which is nearly 4 years or 3.5 years ago, when he got elected. There's a 3-year term, and it's 3 years, isn't it? He did 3 years, and then he got re-elected again, and he has the mandate now. There's no question about it. He has the mandate. He can do whatever he wants to do, but it seems to me like America prevents him from doing what he wants to do. But what I'm seeing here, and I don't know if you're noticing this, just in the last few days, yesterday, the day before, and the day before that, Sky News, ABC, they're all starting to get a little bit less anti-China rhetoric. We're starting to see a little bit less. We're starting to see, and it's not, they haven't gone pro-China, don't get me wrong, but what they're saying now is there is an opportunity to rebuild a relationship with our largest trading partner. And what I'm thinking is that much of this is to do with the fact that America has shafted Australia in so many different ways over the last few weeks. But certainly since Trump came to power for the second time, America has literally, can I say shat on and not lose my monetization, shat on Australia from a great height. And Australia seemed until the last few days to take it. Albanese has not met with Trump. He did try, and Trump let him down. Now he's meeting with Xi Jinping, and he's spending 6 days in China. What do you reckon? What do you make of that?
Well, you're right. He does have a mandate. He has seen off the two most hawkish, xenophobic political leaders of the opposition party. First Scott Morrison, and then the only person who could possibly would be worse than him, Peter Dutton.
That's true.
Peter Dutton is the man who on Anzac Day, which is the 25th of April, 2022, said we must prepare for war with China. So he was vying to become the prime minister, and he got absolutely trounced and even lost his own seat. So I think the criticism that Paul Keating first mentioned raised against Anthony Albanese in 2023. Paul Keating is our former prime minister from the 90s. Paul Keating said that the reason Australia and Anthony Albanese went along with AUKUS and this submarines deal we have with the United Kingdom and the United States is because he was afraid of being wedged on China, that he would be, if he didn't agree, he would be accused of being soft on national security. And the reason I find that unforgivable, because he's saddled us with this horrible deal that's going to be so expensive. But subsequently, the politics has shown that the public was more on his side. He was always going to win those elections. So he didn't need to be so timid. And maybe what you're seeing now is he's learning from this recent victory that he can be less timid, because he's a naturally timid politician, and it's quite frustrating. So maybe he's learning he can be less timid. So what he started off is being rhetorically less timid, and that means he gave a speech a week ago before going to China called the John Curtin Oration. And in that speech, he used the word independence quite a lot. And he was citing John Curtin is our wartime prime minister from World War II, who broke with our dependence on the United Kingdom for our security and turned to America. And a shallow reading of what Curtin did has always said, oh, Curtin founded the US alliance and he made the US alliance the cornerstone that is today. Well, no, he certainly established the US alliance, but the lesson of Curtin is being prepared to break with a security arrangement that isn't working, that is not giving you security, and create new arrangements. And so the true Curtin argument today is it's Australia's security arrangement with America that is making us less secure. And unless we become more independent, as Curtin showed he was capable of being, then we're going to be in trouble. And that's kind of what Albanese said in that speech, without being as direct and pointed against America as I just was. He pretty much made that point, that the importance is independence. But these are just words. Now he has this visit to to China, and I actually just finished writing an article for Global Times, Terry. They asked me to write an article about this, and so some of what I'm about to tell you, I've put in that article.
Right.
Yes, he has an opportunity here, which is unprecedented, because Donald Trump has given it to him. Donald Trump and has been so bombastic, and America has become so erratic that public opinion in Australia is shifting very quickly. America is sinking like a stone in public opinion. There's a poll, the Lowy poll, that has showed that the percentage of Australians who have confidence in America to do the right thing has dropped by 20 points, or 20 percentage points over 12 months. And China was low already to start with, from a low base. China is rising in this poll because people can see by the contrast, well, hang on, whatever you say about China, it's not erratic, it's reliable, right? It is steady and reliable. China does what it says it's going to do, and we have a trade relationship with China that is quite dependable. And the only time that was ever called at risk was under the previous prime minister, who Albanese saw off, because that prime minister, Scott Morrison, deliberately tried to sabotage that trade relationship. And then blame China for it. So the shift in public opinion creates an opportunity for Albanese to. I'm not saying I would expect him. I mean, I would hope, but I wouldn't expect him to be as independent as I would be prepared to be, given the political constraints on a major party politician. But what I called for in this article today, just go back to what successive governments did, the position, the outlook they took from 1972 to 2017. It was a long-term continuum of all governments, or almost all governments in that era. The one exception was Julia Gillard, but otherwise, and she didn't do anything hostile against China per se, but I'll explain why in a minute. But in general, from 1972 and Gough Whitlam, his successor Malcolm Fraser, Bob Hawke, Paul Keating, John Howard, and even Tony Abbott, up until 2017, Australian governments were prepared to put Australia's relationship with China and elevate it as a core national interest, and say to the United States when it mattered, well, that's not your business, that's our business. and we're going to prioritize our relationship. And one of the best examples of that, I have called for Anthony Albanese to virtually repeat, because Jerry, you would have heard the news that I was going to say our friend, but he's not our friend, Elbridge Colby, the US Deputy Secretary of Defense, is demanding that Australia and Japan clarify how they would support the United States in a military conflict over Taiwan. And the irony is that this has come up just as Anthony Albanese has arrived in China.
Yes.
The last time this came up was 2004, when it wasn't our Prime Minister then. The Prime Minister was John Howard, but the Foreign Minister, Alexander Downer, was in China the last time this came up. George W. Bush had been saber-rattling over Taiwan. You had a Taiwanese leader who was seen as somewhat of a risk for maybe this guy would be prepared to declare independence, which is China's red line. And so when he was in Beijing, Alexander Downer was asked what Australia would do if there was a conflict between the United States and China over Taiwan. And Alexander Downer said, quite bluntly, he said, the United States should not assume Australia would support it in a military conflict over Taiwan.
Good.
That's an example of an Australian government. And the reason he said that is because two reasons. We have an ANZUS alliance with America, but that alliance does not, Downer pointed out, it only obliges us to consult with each other when either is directly attacked. We have no obligation to each other in relation to a third-party conflict. None whatsoever. We owe the Americans, if the Americans want to pick a fight over Taiwan, we owe them nothing. And Alexander Downer, one of the most sycophantic pro-US politicians in Australian history, was prepared to say that in 2004. And so all I'm saying in this article today, given that Elbridge Colby has provided this opportunity to Anthony Albanese, he should take it to repeat what Alexander Downer said in 2004.
Yeah. There's a really interesting, I just wrote a script for a video that I made a few days ago. There was an interesting thing that I found as I'm doing research. 71% of Australians fear that China is likely to invade them at some time in the future. This is completely unreal. To me, this is like, wow, why are so many Australians so stupid? China is 10,000 or 9,000 kilometers away. It's 10 days in a boat. It's 10 hours on a flight. You know, how are they going to get 1 million soldiers across there to invade you? Maybe they can send some rockets across. But yeah, China's not going to. What if you send rockets across? What you do? You just destroy it. You've got to occupy it in order to benefit from that invasion. So it's just stupid. It doesn't bear thinking about. But at the same time, 69% of Australians believe that the relationship with China is important. So you've got this incredible dichotomy where most of the country are afraid of China, but most of the country know that without China, they're going to be destroyed economically. So it's a really tough time now. And I think you're absolutely right. Albanese's got an opportunity for possibly the first time in his prime ministership, because he's into his fourth year now, and Australia only has 3-year terms, but he's into his fourth year. He's got another 2.5 years to go. He's got a great opportunity now with a lot of business people there. Chinese people love Australia. They love Australian products. I was on a train the other day talking to this family of 4, 2 kids and 2 parents. And they said, where do you come from? I said, I come from Australia. And the first thing, kangaroo. I mean, none of this was in English. It was all in Chinese. Kangaroos come from Australia too. Have you ever seen a kangaroo? Yes, I've seen a kangaroo. I've touched a kangaroo before, and I've held, and a koala. And then we started talking about crocodiles and alligators and stuff like that. But yeah, we got on to, they absolutely love Australia. They love Australian products because Australia is considered to be a beautiful, clean, pure country full of nice, friendly people. They're all like me and you, Robbie.
Yeah, that's right.
I think Albanese's got a great opportunity, but I do worry about the background behind it and whether or not, as John Mearsheimer says, they can stay friendly with America if they go the wrong way? Can they do it?
Well, that's the thing, that one of America's demands is that we spend 5% of our gross domestic product on military spending. And the premise of that is military spending that is buying American weapons to be used in American wars. Whereas I posed the question publicly, is any of Australia's defence analysis considering the possibility that one day we may have to defend ourselves from the United States? Why do we assume, because China is not a country that's ever put any demands on us, but America is absolutely putting demands on us. America is trying to, the reason for this conflict is America, well, not all Americans, there's plenty of Americans would be more than happy nowadays to just pack up, go home and defend their own borders. But this neoconservative set in America is trying to defend a hegemony, a global empire, and they regard Australia as their territory for that effort. Especially, we are their staging base for any kind of war with China, which is their only possible rival, right?
And their eyes and ears in the Southern Hemisphere.
Their eyes and ears, exactly. Their facilities here make us complicit in their wars and in their recent war crimes. And the most recent one being the strike on Iran, which was against international law, which, by the way, our government could not bring itself to condemn, even though for 3 years they've been running around sanctimoniously. They can never talk about Russia and Ukraine without calling it the illegal, immoral, unprovoked invasion of Ukraine. So by international law standards, Donald Trump did exactly the same thing, but they're not capable of condemning that. Penny Wong, now, Anthony Albanese, they're always hedging their bets though. So because it's softly, because despite the rhetoric, and it is really good that Anthony Albanese is there for 6 days, the brutal fact is that in other areas where you look at actions, not words, we are increasing our military buildup with the United States. We are increasing military bases here. Right now, last night, the biannual Talisman Sabre military exercises began.
Yep.
These things have been going on for at least 25 years, Jerry. For the first time ever, they started with an opening ceremony on Sydney Harbour. In other words, we're becoming very militaristic culture, right, to coincide with this. This is where the fear against China is coming from. Penny Wong decided to give a speech on Friday in Malaysia at the International Institute of Strategic Studies there, where while Anthony Albanese is definitely going to try and be putting, accentuating the positive on his trip, she decided to accentuate the negative. And she had a pot shot at China on a number of different things, including its lack of transparency for its military buildup, supposedly, even though in the next breath she turned around and said that Australia's AUKUS deal is transparent, when that's the least transparent military arrangement ever. But what that speech actually showed is that Australia is prepared to speak quite bluntly to China. We sort of regard it as a badge of honor that we can do that. But we are terrified, absolutely terrified, of offending the United States. So which one are we actually afraid of here?
Yeah, it does seem to me that Australia is not actually afraid of China. And my experience of China, my experience of how they are, I've lived here almost 21 years now. My experience of China is that they're not a threat to Australia. They will never be a threat to Australia. The threat is entirely contrived by the people that Australians should be afraid of, and they are quite afraid. It does seem to me like Penny Wong is playing bad cop to Albanese's good cop, though, as is Richard Marles. Is it Richard Marles?
Richard Marles, yep.
Richard Marles, the defense minister. So the defense minister and the foreign minister are both playing bad cop, while the prime minister is here being wined, dined, and he'll meet the panda. He's going to Chengdu, so he's going to meet pandas And that kind of thing is always a good thing. He'll have a great time when he's here. He'll be exposed to some fantastic culture. They'll do a lot of business deals. I think it's going to be very, very good. I just hope it's not going to meet the ire of the Americans. And I would love to see Albanese, while he's here, say, we are not going to be taking one side or the other. We are going to do what is best for Australia. That's all he needs to say.
That's all he needs to say.
Yeah. Should we move on to Mary Kostakides now?
Please.
Yeah. She is, for those people who don't know, Mary is a very, very well-known Australian journalist. And what's happened to her recently?
So Mary is someone that certain people are trying to make an example of, because they're trying to suppress Australian criticism of the genocide in Gaza. Now, Jerry, you and I originally bonded over the word genocide when it was applied to the Uyghurs in Xinjiang.
When it wasn't happening in Xinjiang. Yeah.
Well, nobody who has ever used the word genocide again in relation to the Uyghurs has actually alleged mass extermination, mass graves, right? Mass slaughter. This was supposedly, they came up with some convoluted definition of a cultural genocide or something like that, none of which was true. And the reason I got to know you is I saw you were riding your bike. Here's an Australian riding his bike through Xinjiang. I got to talk to him. What have you seen, Jerry Gray? We got to know each other.
Yep.
But then in the last 20 months or so, 18 months, the world has borne witness to something completely unprecedented. And what's there's been horrible things happen throughout all of human history, of course, but what's unprecedented about this is that nowhere in human history has the whole world, thanks to technology, borne witness to this mass slaughter of children. And it's been relentless. And the same people that you and I have been in combat with to debunk their claims of a Uyghur genocide in China, those very same people, American and American-backed people, have turned around saying Israel has a right to defend itself. Mm-hmm. So Mary Kostakides is a very brave Australian journalist. She's an iconic Australian journalist because she hails from a time when there were only 5 channels on television. Now there's 1 billion streaming services and whatever, and kids nowadays don't know what old style television was. But she hails from a time, and so she was the chief news anchor on SBS, one of those 5 channels, for 20 years. And SBS was the channel you turned into if you wanted serious world news, because it was for ethnic communities.
It was international, yeah.
She was very iconic. That made her an icon in Australia. And from that time, she's been an outspoken defender of Palestinians. And of course, now that the worst possible experience is happening over there, she's continued to be outspoken. But because she's iconic, there are organizations in Australia that claim to speak for the Jewish community, but there are plenty of members of the Jewish community who say they don't speak for us. What they are is they use their position in Australia to just become lobbyists for the state of Israel. And so the leading one of those is called the Zionist Federation of Australia, and they have taken Mary to court under Section 18C of the Racial and Religious Discrimination Act it's just the Racial Discrimination Act, where for basically, essentially they would call it anti-Semitism, but just for doing her job as a journalist, where she was sharing information on Twitter and commenting on it. She wasn't going after Jewish people. She was commenting on the actions of the state of Israel and the Netanyahu government. And so they have taken up a complaint under this section of a certain law in Australia. Now, the law is written that it's supposed to go to a mediation first, and hopefully the two sides can find grounds for some form of reconciliation. But the Zionist Federation are actually taking it to court, because what they want the court to do is to find Mary guilty and be able to fine her, right? Levy heavy fines against her, so that this would not be a criminal matter, but so that this sends a chilling effect. This has a chilling effect on the debate in Australia, which is fierce. The debate in Australia right now, the political debate about what's happening in Israel, is absolutely fierce. And the Zionist Federation and its sister organizations, they're trying to shut down that debate. They're trying to have it labeled anti-Semitism and make it give the government the powers to just shut down the right to protest, shut down the right to speech, etc. And because they do not want people criticizing the state of Israel's actions. And so Mary is like a lead duck in a sense. If you go duck hunting and they're flying on the sky, you shoot at the lead duck. They're shooting at Mary because she is such an icon to try and flex their muscles and send to have a chilling effect on the debate in Australia.
Yeah. As a bit of background for this, did you follow the Antoinette Lattouf case where she was fired by the ABC because the Jewish lobby complained to the ABC that she was anti-Semitic? Did you follow that one? She was actually totally exonerated. She
was totally exonerated. This was an example of how the Israel lobby actually works. Now, can I say, one of the things that these groups that represent the Jewish community are claiming is that the Jewish community in Australia is being made to feel afraid because there's these regular protests on the street, and sometimes the protests get quite intense. And 2 weekends ago, there were 2 incidents that, and I'm saying this because I wanted to contrast to Antoinette Lattouf. One contrast anyway. There were 2 incidences. One was very suspicious, and so we'll leave that aside. There was a synagogue in Melbourne, and somebody who happened to just come all the way from Sydney to Melbourne just to do this, used some kind of lighter fluid and to light a fire at the synagogue door, and it singed the paint on the door. And that's been regarded as an attack on the Jewish community. And I don't want to downplay that if you were in the Jewish community and in the synagogue at the time, you would have felt afraid. I'm sure that's true. But that's in the category. There's been many bizarre such attacks in Australia in the last year, and the police investigation have shown that they haven't tied any of them to actual anti-Semitism. In fact, most of them were related to an organized crime figure who was getting his minions to go around and create the appearance of anti-Jewish attacks so he could have some kind of a bargaining chip with the New South Wales police. So that's a suspicious thing. We'll put that aside. But the other one was there was a big protest in Melbourne, and then a breakaway group went to a restaurant and they stormed the restaurant, and that led to a bit of a scuffle before they were thrown out. The reason they did that is because that was not random. That they didn't just go to any Jewish restaurant. This restaurant they went to was owned by a man who is a spokesman for what's called the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which is this organization that was just in the news that very week for being responsible for 500 deaths of Palestinians as they queue up for food. The US soldiers and Israeli soldiers associated with this foundation were taking pot shots at these people and killing them in the queues, right? And this became a big scandal in Australia and around the world. And the man who owns that restaurant is a spokesman for that foundation. And so they were targeting him because of his connection to this. Now, that may not be all that palatable, but it wasn't random. He wasn't being targeted because he was Jewish. He was being targeted for that reason. But the contrast to Antoinette Lattouf, Jerry, is that she upset, just say what she did, just say the upset that she caused was legitimate. She upset people in the Jewish community because she was on radio and she was clearly taking the side of Palestine. This is in December 2023. But the people that were that targeted her, these were a very well-organized group of Jewish lawyers. They don't have to go on the street to have their say. They got to flex their muscles using their lobbying power that few people on the Palestine side of the debate actually have. But these Jewish lawyers have real lobbying power. And there were these WhatsApp groups, and this is known because in the process of discovering these court cases, these things became public.
Yep.
And you can see these transcripts in these WhatsApp groups where they were coordinating their activities and bragging about how well connected they are to all the people in high places, so they could use that might to get this woman sacked from her job on radio, Antoinette Lattouf, because of her views on Palestine. And that's the difference. So they do very effective counterattacks in private and get people fired from their jobs. The people who go to the streets to protest on behalf of Palestine, they don't have that power. All they have is the power to get out in the streets. Yep. And yet the same organized pro-Israel lobby is trying to say that action on the streets is somehow illegitimate because it's making them feel afraid. And now the government is being asked to pass laws that would forbid that from happening. And this is completely unacceptable in any kind of country that pretends it's a democracy.
So the government has already passed some laws that prevent peaceful protests. So this is the very cornerstone of democracy. You should have the ability to have peaceful protests. Believe it or not, China does. And I've seen many peaceful protests. They literally have thousands of them a day. It's a fact. I mean, it's a big country. There's lots of things to protest about, but they're usually dealt with very, very quickly, and they don't get violent. And the reason they don't get violent is because they're dealt with very quickly. Now, they may not get the result they want, but when you go to protest outside of a factory because you haven't been paid, the government comes down and says, why haven't you been paid? And talks to the factory. Why haven't you paid them? Oh, we haven't got the... Okay, so let's do a deal here. And that's what the government does. It works pretty well. Peaceful protests have stopped working in the West. This is the problem where peaceful protest doesn't work. So now protests need to be disruptive. They need to get a little bit aggressive, assertive. And I'm not advocating a violent protest or a non-peaceful protest. But I'm suggesting that if you want to do something peacefully, let's take a look back to 2002, 2003, when the weapons of mass destruction saga was being touted around Britain, most of Europe, most of America. Millions and millions of people peacefully protested to say, don't go to war. And the government went to war. So they said, it doesn't matter what the people think. This is not democracy anymore. Peaceful protest has failed. So now they're writing laws to prevent any peaceful protest becoming non-peaceful, becoming disruptive, becoming violent. So sometimes it's not about violence. I mean, the one in the UK, Palestine Action, has been declared a terrorist group because they spray painted a couple of planes. Spray painting, criminal damage. Okay, still relatively peaceful. But there's a crime involved. But you have a law to deal with that crime. It's called criminal damage. You can arrest them, you can charge them, and you can put them in prison if you really wanted to for criminal damage. So why do you need a new law to say that this is a terrorist offense? What's going on in Australia with that?
Well, we're on our way there. Certainly, it's interesting to me over the weekend, the public pushback against these latest round of demands by the Israel lobby for these kinds of laws. The pushback has been enormous. And so Anthony Albanese will have to deal with that when he is back. But otherwise, I remember in 2002, after 9/11, and they started introducing anti-terrorism laws in Australia. One of the interesting, more philosophical legal debates was, hang on, why do we need a crime of terrorism when all terrorism involves existing crimes?
Yes.
And the reason why, and we tried to fight it at the time, because the government wanted to bring in a regime where they could label things, and then there will be all these knock-on effects from that. And what we warned about then in 2002 is the consequences of taking the law down this kind of path. That is exactly what you've seen with this banning of Palestine Action in the UK just in the last week or so. Right, so now that anyone associated with that they're listed as a terrorist group, and anyone associated with that organization can now be arrested, etc. And this is incredibly chilling. This is the Western world, the so-called defenders of individual liberties that take World War II. We were on the side of defending individual liberties, and the kinds of things we're talking about now are more associated with Nazi and communist regimes, right? That's how they were presented to us. And now we've gone down that path. Mary Kostakides is a public symbol of Australians who are prepared to speak out for the plight of for the truth, right? She was a huge defender of Assange. She's been one of the few journalists to defend Dan Duggan and speak out for Dan Duggan. She is a consistent journalist. She's a legend. And because we are complicit in this most horrible event of our lives, the Gaza genocide, every Western country that supports Israel is complicit in that. Our governments are frankly taking us down a path of fascism in order to give themselves the power to suppress all that. And if we hold these principles dearly, we need to fight it, and that's what we're trying to do very much.
So, is Australia? Has it gone too far? Is it going too far? Does it look like it can be salvaged? What's the future look like for an Australian who doesn't follow the government narrative? Israel can defend itself; it has the right, and this is just self-defense. China is a threat. I'm afraid to go back to Australia because I speak out for China, and I have a feeling that I'd be arrested as an unregistered agent of foreign influence. I speak very highly of China. It has its problems, but there's so many people who talk about Chinese problems. I feel no need, and they don't affect my life. So I talk about how my life is affected in China, and it will get me into trouble in Australia. I could be the next Dan Duggan because I'm here in Australia. I make some money on YouTube, and occasionally I write an article, so I'm being paid by the state government. In fact, so will you if you get paid by Global Times or CGTN. So make sure you register if you are getting paid.
I accept the gig, but I don't accept I make it clear when I've already told them I'll write the article, but I won't accept the payment.
Fair enough. That's fair enough. So is Australia going? Is it going to stop this? Do you see it continuing? How do you see it the future?
Well, for people in the real world, it already is too far. That's why Dan Duggan is in prison. But most people don't know it's gone too far, and so the politics doesn't have to address just how bad it actually is, and that's where I think Anthony Albanese has an opportunity here. If he is in any way a credible political leader, and words such as he used in his speech on the John Curtin oration about independence are genuine, then he needs to make sure that these opportunities like he has now, he takes advantage of it, and he brings Australia back from the brink, puts Australia back on an independent path. Like I said, all we need is to be have the same level of independence we were prepared to show from 1972 to 2017, right? Just go back to that continuum. So if he does that, then we will be stepping back from the brink. Now, then he might even find the courage to do something similar on the in relation to this question of criticizing Israel over what's happening in Gaza, because the main thing Anthony Albanese was known for before he became prime minister was being a pro-Palestine member of parliament, and he's disappointed everybody with his timidity and seemingly his willingness to be an apologist for what the Israelis are doing ever since he's been prime minister. I see that as the politics of it, right? He's afraid. His biggest political drawback is his fear, his timidness. If he sees this opportunity that Donald Trump, of all people, has afforded him to assert an independent Australian position, apologies for that. If he sees us on this opportunity, we can bring the country back from the brink. Our party exists because these are the issues that we fight on, right? So we're not just commentating on this. We're fighting every day to make sure that is the outcome that happens.
Yeah.
Because this is our future. We can't let the country go down this path, because you don't know what you got till it's gone. And you can already look back and see the things that have gone, right? And if we keep going down this path, it's going to be some kind of dystopia, and we can't let that happen. So we're fighting every day, and we're fighting on principles, anti-war, pro-development, and on those principles, you've got to condemn what's happening in Gaza. and you've got to admire what's happening in China, right? And that's the position the Citizens Party takes, and hopefully we get that through to the public, who are otherwise, being manipulated by propaganda that says they should be afraid of China, and they should accept that what Israel's doing is somehow justified.
Yeah, so we've got to see some changes. For me, the Antoinette Lattouf case was good because the law supported, I think, the right decision. Now, sometimes you see court cases and they finish and you say, well, I don't agree with that, but we don't know all of the story. And so with this one, I was 100% behind Antoinette Lattouf, and I thought this is really bad. It was good to see her win. With Mary Kostakides, it will be good to see her win. With Dan Duggan, it would be good to see the government step up and say, we're going to actually defy America on this one. And whether or not the law says he can go to America, the ethics say he shouldn't. And that's the bottom line. The ethics say that he shouldn't. You shouldn't separate this one man from his 6 children because of something he did a long time ago that was not illegal when he did it. And it's probably still not illegal now, if we're really honest with ourselves. So it doesn't matter what he did or didn't do. We're now looking at the ethical considerations. So if those 3 things happen, and we see Albanese over here, you and I, in a few months' time, could be talking about the great relationship that has rebuilt between our 2 countries. And I consider, I'm not Chinese, I consider China to be my country now. I've been here 21 years. I lived in Australia for 17 years. I lived in the UK for 28 years. Now you can work out how old I am from that. But I consider myself to be at home when I'm here.
Well, just on that, Jerry, because I better get going in a second. But let me just, final thought. I'm going to be coming and visiting you in your lovely country very soon. My first ever visit to China. I'm leaving here on the 14th of October. So I'm sure we'll work out how to catch up sometime in the few weeks that I'm there. And I'm very, very, very much looking forward to it. It's a tour it's a study tour of China, we're calling it. Our party is actually sponsoring this tour. And we're inviting Australians to come along. So if you're an Australian watching this and you're interested in this study tour, you can email the Citizens Party, info@citizensparty.org.au. And if you want the details, you're interested in coming in October, there's spots open. We're going to the person who's organized the tour has it's not a typical tour. It's to give, because our party is very interested in economic development and things like the economic success of China, it's to give us a flavor of those aspects of China and how it's working on the ground. So anyway, this is something I'm definitely looking forward to. Yeah, that's right. If we don't, we might talk before then. I'm sure we will, but otherwise we'll finally get to meet in person in October.
Yeah, actually, we have a lot of mutual friends now as well. A lot of people watch me, and have come to both of us. info@citizensparty.org.au. If you're interested and have a reason why you might want to be sponsored to go visit China, come visit China, then that's the address. Is that correct?
When I say sponsor, it's I don't mean we're paying for it. It's
okay. Sorry,
we're organizing it. People have to pay their own way, but it's a package deal. And it's everything's included. So if you're interested, let us know.
Do you know yet what cities you'll be visiting?
Oh man, a whole bunch. There's an extended tour that I'll be on, which does the main tour actually doesn't include Beijing, but the extended tour does. That I will get to go to Beijing. But it's places like Shenzhen. What's the city where everything's up really high, everything's elevated?
Chongqing.
Chongqing. That one. Chongqing. Shanghai. And there's a lot of high-speed train rides. And a bunch. Xi'an, I'm pretty sure, is on there. The city in what's the city in Hainan, or is that the name of the city?
Hainan is an island. It's Haikou or Sanya.
Haikou in Hainan Island. Sorry, I'll get better with these after I've been there, when I got photos to look at.
Well, I can tell you Haikou is nice. You'll enjoy that. Shenzhen is just like, oh wow, I didn't expect. No matter what you expect, it's Wow, it's bigger than you expected. Shenzhen is only an hour from me. So when you're in Shenzhen, you're either coming across to see me or I'm coming across to see you.
Okay. Sounds good.
All right. Okay, so on that happy note, let's finish off for today. And please, everybody, contact the Citizens Party for more information about what they do. Go to the Dan Duggan, free Dan Duggan, freedanduggan.com.au, I think it is, and just offer your support. And please write to the Attorney General. It doesn't cost anything to write. And the more she gets, the more she knows that people support Dan Duggan. And thank you, Robbie, for this opportunity to talk to you again. I know you've got to rush off to another meeting or something, and I will rush off to a cup of coffee with my wife. And I'll see everybody. Thank you very much for joining us. We will see you next time.
And we'll see you soon. Okay, see you, Jerry.
Cheers.